Tom, every year, millions of people get injured, become disabled in work incidents. And this is a huge multi-billion-dollar problem for the economy. Let's talk about how Evolution IQ helps solve this issue and helps get people back to work faster.
Great. I'd like to start off with a short story here. So my name is Tomas Vykruta. I'm the co-founder, CEO. I've been in tech since the 90s. I spent almost 10 years at Google before Evolution IQ. I'm also a data scientist and I'm a pilot. And there's an interesting comparison between aviation and insurance. In the 1940s, aviation was done mostly by the seat of your pants. As a pilot, you go to your airplane, you hop in, you start it, and you start flying. If you encountered bad weather, or if you got lost, which happened a lot before there were GPS, often this kind of mistake was fatal. It was one of the most dangerous ways to travel at that time. Now here we are in 2022, things are very different. The airplane itself hasn't changed too much, the mechanics of it, the aerodynamics, the power plant. What's changed is the amount of data that is now fed to the pilot. We have sensors on board the airplane that are feeding information about the engine. We have sensors outside about the environment, about the conditions outside. We have satellites in space beaming down weather data. We have stations on the ground sending information about other airplanes in the air. The result of this is that aviation has now become the safest way to travel. It's just remarkable, how much data has improved safety. Insurance, specifically bodily injury insurance, the areas that we deal with today are much like aviation in the 1940s. It's mostly done by the seat of your pants. These large insurance carriers have hundreds of adjusters that are dealing with these incredibly complex bodily injury claims with rich medical data. They're overloaded with information. They don't benefit from historical information, and decisions are very much ad hoc. Sometimes they're good, oftentimes they're not the right decisions. However, insurance, like aviation, has this incredibly rich data set that's been amassed over the past 10 years when they went digital. And so our company's mission is to basically do what aviation has done, leverage that data set, learn from it, and present it, to the adjusters so that they can make the best decisions at the best time, so they can see through the clouds, they can navigate through difficult conditions, difficult weather, and always achieve the best outcomes.
And how do you approach this problem? What kind of insurance companies you work with, and what are the main capabilities of the system?
So our focus is companies that are dealing with either people that are injured at work or people that have become disabled. So it's workers' compensation and disability specifically. This includes carriers, TPAs, and large corporates. The software is an AI SaaS platform. It's hosted in Google Cloud, and we provide guidance to the examiners. It's like a co-pilot that puts them on the most important claimant at the right time and gives them the right guidance to achieve the best possible outcome.
What kind of data do you use to do that? You talk about on your website about internal data that is gathered by the insurers, but also about the external data that you collect for them.
So there are three categories of data that we use. We have large external data sets, such as historical medical outcomes that we use. We've also built our own. We have our own team that can label data. We have like nurses that work with us. We give them assignments. That's the second. The third one is we also use the insurance company's historical claims data. So these carriers have seen millions and millions of people that have become injured or disabled. They've gone through the sequence of events to an outcome. The outcome can be recovery, disability, partial disability, death, right? There's a finite number of things. That information encodes like incredible richness to help guide the future claims that have not happened yet or have not closed yet. So those are the three sets that we train our models with. And it includes both very rich structured data, time series structured data, as well as a lot of notes that the examiners have entered. and bills being uploaded by doctors, which have descriptions of diagnoses, surgeries, and those kinds of things.
This is a lot of unstructured data. We'll talk in a minute about how you manage to process it and make it accessible and useful in the process of working with claims. But before that, let's talk about the success stories of the companies. How do you define the success for implementation of your product, and what kind of stories are your favorites?
So our North Star success metric is how many more people are we able to return back to a productive lifestyle, back to work, and how much can we reduce the total number of absence days. This is how we measure internally. As far as the business ROI, the insurance companies measure this in terms of a loss ratio and a expense ratio. And so we measure both of these and report on them. A success story, I have one that I'd like to share that happened recently. A nurse had been on full disability for about 8 years. She was unable to bend over and pick up heavy objects, and her hands are not working well, which are both required to be a nurse. You have to turn patients over, administer injections and medicines, and so on. Our system identified her case as a potential return to work. The carrier investigated it, and they confirmed that indeed this was a return to work. They contacted her, and they got her a job. She was ecstatic about this because she had believed that she was done working, and really, like, her lifestyle, her kind of mission in life, she wanted to help people. She was a nurse. Nurses are wonderful people. What had happened in the last couple of years is this field of telenursing has popped up, where nurses can help patients over an iPad. So the job was presented to her. Now, what's interesting is that the other thing that's happened is that salaries have gone up a lot for nurses. So she's now back at work. She's able to work from her home. She's helping people. She's also collecting a much, much bigger paycheck as a result of this. Not only because the benefit for disability is something like 60% of your former salary. You also don't get promotions and raises, and you don't really follow the increase in pay that has been happening the last couple of years. So she was so happy about this. She wrote a letter to the insurance company. This is not what you typically see. People don't usually write letters, but she did, and she thanked them for turning her life around. And makes us so happy that our technology was able to help identify this case. This is an example of what claims guidance is. It's a very complex AI system working alongside a human being. In this case, it's an adjuster to help them identify this point in time when they can make a real difference.
This is a very inspiring case. I wonder, maybe we can use it as an example of how the system works. So how did Evolution IQ help the adjuster to, first of all, identify that case after the 8 years that gone since the incident happened, and reconsider the case?
Right. So there's three important pieces. The first one is medically. We have to be able to parse through this very long sequence that starts with an injury or disability, and then visits to a doctor and improvements, or sometimes non-improvements, and understand to what degree has a person recovered and what are the physical limitations. So in this case, she still can't, pick up heavy objects. She still can't use her hands to do like complex things. So now we have a list, a mapping of what are the physical abilities this person has. We also have a list of skills, kind of mental skills that they've had based on their past jobs. We then have a large database of all jobs in the national labor force, and we can create a mapping of what skills the person has, what physical abilities they have, and what jobs are available in the market for them, given that combination, given that triplet, the joining of those three. So in this case, the system discovered, out of tens of thousands of possible jobs, that telenursing is actually a great fit because it has all the requirements met for knowing, how to deal with patients. And it doesn't require the ability to pick up heavy objects and do strenuous things with your hands. So that's, and it's a very hard problem for a human examiner to do. You'd have to be a medical expert labor expert, skills expert, spend hours like sifting through these abilities and finding what's out there for them.
How many of such cases do you think are overlooked in this same way? And how big of an impact we can have if we manage to empower examiners with the technology like yours?
It's it's very significant. It's up to 15% of folks that are on what is believed to be long-term or permanent disability are potentially able to return to work if the right, combination at the right time happens.
15% is a very significant number. Okay, let's talk about how the system works under the hood. So you said you deal with multiple sources of data, and some of that is structured and the other parts are non-structured or unstructured. I wonder, maybe we start with what are important recent innovations in AI that say made the company possible, that you decided, was there anything that you looked at the field and you said, okay, now we have this set of technologies, it's a good idea to use them and leverage them to start the company?
Yeah, it's a combination of maturity of the insurance industry and what's happened in AI. In AI, there has been a big maturity in sequential neural nets on large tabular data. And there's also been a lot of maturity on sequential neural nets for unstructured data, large language models. On the insurance side, they moved from paper to digital about 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, and they started collecting data and structuring it such that we can go back in time and start training on large data sets.
Yeah, that's a powerful combination. And in terms of the industry, and the AI tools has matured quite a bit over the last few years, but it's still early days. So I wonder how much of what you need for your needs can you get off the shelves, off the shelf, and how much do you actually need to build in house in terms of your AI models?
So everything we build is highly customized in-house. There is no off-the-shelf model for training this sequential medical plus, labor data. We have a very customized encoder. We have to create very custom labeling techniques, custom evaluators. It is a pretty unique, nuanced one-off problem.
It is. That was my guess, so that's why I'm asking. And in terms of labeling, what are what are the main challenges there?
So one of the issues with labeling is there are quite a few false negatives. The insurance companies, because the opportunity for us is that they are not great at this, doing this manually, and yet it's their training data. So we have to develop both heuristic techniques as well as use a lot of human methods to create label sets that are useful for us. We can't feed garbage in, garbage out. And as far as the biggest challenge, which we've solved now, is that every carrier has a different way to represent the data. They have different schemas, different versions of databases. So we had to work with many custom data sets before we could finally create a unified schema. And then we can transform and normalize every carrier's data to look the same. So we've achieved this now, but it took us a couple of years to be able to get there. Now we can basically share the same infrastructure for the entire world of bodily injury claims in the US and even outside.
Yeah, that sounds like a very significant achievement, because I can imagine that since most of those systems have some homegrown parts or totally homegrown, they and there's a hodgepodge of different systems at each insurer, their data schemas will be very different from each other. So how did you how did you achieve that uniformity?
Yeah, so we started off, first step was to launch, several carriers with custom, basically copy paste code. We just wanted to get to a place where things were working. Once we had those launched and they were mature, we're able to look and find the commonalities between these data sets and develop what we call a CDF, a custom data format, which lives inside of a data warehouse, inside BigQuery. We then went back in time and we migrated those custom data sets into the new CDF. And we made those work. So we're able to move those carriers from their custom code base to the shared code base. Once we had those carriers up and running, we're now able to bring new carriers directly into the CDF, and that's working wonderfully. Even as we start to launch new products and bring in new lines of business, maybe some slightly different variation of bodily injury, the customizations needed for the common data format are quite small. So we now have what is likely the world's largest database of bodily injury claims inside of a common data format, which also opens up opportunities for transfer learning, which is something that is going to be a big investment for us on the horizon.
Transfer learning is an interesting thing, so would love you to talk a little bit more about it, how you're going to use it, and what are the other important things on your roadmap in terms of developing your AI systems further.
Right. So another big area of investment for us is to create like a GPT-3, a very large language model that is specifically focused at understanding medical language, recovery times, job descriptions, capabilities. We have something in place now, but there's obviously a lot of work to be done there. We also have a lot of label data for examiners. They can provide feedback on whether or not they disagree with the recommendations. And we plan to use that as like an adversarial neural net, which can predict what the likely action of the human is relative to the score output by the neural net, which allows us to start doing more automation and really start to handle only the most complex claims. So over time, we expect to start to take more and more off their plate and allow them to spend more time really with the people where that need the most attention.
And adversarial net will predict the human reaction, and you will find those cases where human reaction is most divergent from your model assessment.
Yeah. So if our model recommends Joe in Alabama is potentially ready for return to work. Here's the facts why. We have deep explanations in our system. Please review. The examiner can say, in this case, recommendation is wrong, and here's why. Right? We can use that data to train a separate model and start improving overall results, because our initial model is trained purely on the historical data set from the carriers and from the external side, which are imperfect. So this way, we're building up our own additional data set, which will drive towards kind of the ultimate guidance system and continue to improve and give us better accuracy.
In terms of the access to the data that you need to train the systems, and this is more of a advice to us entrepreneurs building in insurance industry, what kind of challenges you face there accessing the data, if any, and what's your advice to other folks building there, how to approach the data?
So it's incredibly hard. It took us a year to get the first data set. The insurance industry is very opaque. They're not used to sharing data with vendors. A lot of them have never done it. A lot of them were the first company they've ever done this with. And it's a chicken and egg problem. You need the data to prove the value, but you can't prove the value without the data. So what we had done is we interviewed a lot of the insurance executives and operators and built a really compelling, fully clickable demo without a real data backend. And we used that to sell the vision. That led us eventually to getting our first data set, which we could then use to launch a product, build a case study, get a reference on the customer. And that is what gets you more data sets, is a case study and a reference. Without that, it's really, really hard. The demo alone is a low hit rate. I can say you've just got to get out there and just keep trying.
So it took some time. It took you some time to get that first customer with the demo, and it was a low hit rate, but that was totally worth it.
Absolutely. I mean, that opened up the ability for the first real hardcore AI company to come in and build a system that is now being adopted quickly by the entire industry.
Sounds good. So that's the way I think for many companies and many industries to approach it, is to find that first customer, convince them that you know what you do, and get them to share the data with you. The other issue with the data is, say, the all the set of issues around bias. and especially important in such sensitive industry as insurance. What's your thoughts on that, and how do you deal with that?
So there are three axes. There's quantitative, qualitative, and then there's the guidance aspect. On the guidance aspect, we don't make any final decisions with pure AI. We provide guidance to the professional examiners and suggest, actions they should take, suggest where they should be looking. We also quantitatively, we've invested heavily into evaluating our models, evaluating the input data, evaluating scoring to ensure that it's meeting the right kind of distributions. And qualitatively, we spend a ton of time just reading and reading and reading a lot of these claims and this medical data. So we understand intuitively what is encoded here, what are the kinds of features that we should definitely be using, and what are the ones that are risky and we should definitely not be using. So our AI team are all at this point like experts in how to read, disability and work injury claims, which is an important part of being a data scientist, is to really be the master of that real world domain, so you can then build a machine and teach it, how to think and predict in that domain.
Taking a short detour here, but curious in terms of your team, did you look for people who already have this domain expertise, or did you just have it as a part of their training in when they joined the team to learn the subject?
No, we did not look for those people. It would be great if there are a bunch of AI experts that are deep experts in bodily injury claims. There are none. So for us, it was a non-starter. So, we said like, look, we're a new AI company. I came out of Google. I talked to, I put the word out there, and a couple other folks from Google were interested. It's a very interesting science problem, to be the first company that's tackling this data set. To be working with bodily injury, with human medical data is an interesting problem. So smart people that want to tackle impossible problems are naturally attracted to it. And turns out it's not that hard to learn the domain knowledge. You read a couple dozen of these claims. They're very complex. They can be dozens of pages, but you start to get a pretty good sense of what happens, what causes people to become disabled or injured. What are the kinds of treatments that they see? What are the doctors saying? And what happens in the end? What happens 20, 30 years later to that person?
Okay, so that was my guess, that it's hard to find such people, but you find it's much easier to train them,
Yeah.
or at least they're capable of quickly learning these things.
Yeah. Now, what we did, especially in early days, we spent a lot of time having interviews with the frontline examiners, with the operators. They don't know AI, but they know their world of bodily injury very well. And we bring them examples. We would say, claim number 2345, this particular thing happened. Can you talk to us about why you made this decision, or why you didn't make this decision, or why did this outcome happen? Why was this kind of compensability rating given? So through that process, we all became experts in the industry pretty quickly. But it was many hours having these kinds of interviews with the folks at the insurance companies.
When you say many hours, if you have to guess, what would be the number?
Oh, definitely hundreds of hours. We would have several 1-hour meetings per week going on for months to tackle the first problem alone. And those meetings would include several of our senior data scientists. Now, in a full work week, to dedicate something like 10% of it to learning actually isn't crazy. And I think that's kind of the minimum number that companies should be setting up for. If an AI team is living in a silo, just looking at data, they're going to have a tough time cracking, some of these older established industries.
Right, and you still continue it, this process, it's ongoing, right?
We do for net new modules. So, we're a large platform. We're AI claims guidance. There's a lot of important decision points along the life cycle of a claim. There are different kinds of claims, different kinds of injuries. So we're always like listening to the industry and launching new modules that solve specific pain points. So each time we do that, we do go through this research phase. But once a module is launched and running smoothly, then there's really no need. we're at that point tuning the models, and there might be some customer feedback, but the amount of interviewing goes to very light or even to zero.
To play in devil's advocate, it seems like the situation can change over time. So there will be some adjustments to your models and based on the real life, real world that is slowly but changing. So when you say it goes to zero, I imagine it goes to some much lower level, but still not zero.
Yeah, I mean, we're always reviewing and reading claims, especially if the customer disagrees with the prediction. So that level of work is always happening. And what's really great about our industry is our data set comes with like a manual of exactly what was done to the claim during the various stages. The insurance industry requires examiners to add notes to say, on this date, I made this phone call, I learned this information, I made this decision, and this is the decision. And they add that as a note. So we can learn a ton by reading through it. And in fact, our models are trained from this data. So we're kind of transferred learning from what they've done um, into the model. I think other industries where they have purely like quantitative data sets, they have to go and ask the customer, why did you do this? We have that documentation, which is why we do spend a lot of time initially in interviews, but eventually we can get all that insight from the notes themselves.
I see. This is very important specifics about your industry. Sounds good. Let's talk about the origins of the company. So you were at Google, and what happened? What was the trigger that made you say, okay, it's time to start a company and go into this particular field?
Right. So I was at Google. I was working on a lot of different machine learning projects. I was in a very lucky position. I was hopping around different parts of Google and basically bringing machine learning to groups that were using older heuristic methods. They had very complex rules, and I just fell in love with this. I felt like I was 12 again, learning how to program for the first time. Just the amount of impact and the amount of reduction in maintenance cost and the innovation we could do, the improvement in accuracy, it was just astonishing. So, I worked at Waymo for a little while on autonomous cars. I worked in Google Maps, helping to identify, like fraudulent bank listings in India. I worked on pulling out like event information from reviews and surfacing those and showing like where there's fun events happening in cities around the world. And eventually, I thought this is great at Google, but surely there must be an industry outside of digital advertising that could benefit from machine learning. And I was looking for an industry that had a repeatable problem, had a massive data set, was using manual or like rules-based solutions only, and there was not much competition there yet. And so, bodily injury claims were perfect, right? It's a huge industry, repeatable problem. It's always a human body. It's always an injury. There's always, one of the finite outcomes. They have switched to digital, so the data existed in these databases. It was not being used at all for making, predictions. So it was like the right intersection, the right timing. The industry was just getting interested in machine learning. They were trying to use it, a little bit internally. So it was perfect. So, I had a good feeling about it. I also felt good about the mission, to help get people that have been injured back to work sooner, get people off disability, prevent them from going to school in the first place. So it was a good like call to action to do something meaningful, with this technology.
How did you go about thinking about different industries that you can apply yourself to? Was insurance one of the first ideas that came to your mind, or did you go through several others? And how did insurance even come to your field of view that you decided that to consider it as a candidate?
Yeah, I went through many others, at different levels, probably dozens. I was working on a crypto project before that. The reason that I exited from that is because the regulatory space was pretty toxic, as it is now again with FTX. People go to prison. I just didn't want to be part of that, unfortunately. I do believe long-term Web3, but it wasn't the right time yet. Insurance was accidental. It found me. I had dinner with a guy that worked inside of an SIU company. So they do investigations for insurance carriers for fraud specifically. The insurance company has a thesis that somebody's committing fraud. They claim to be disabled, but they're actually out there playing golf, and they send somebody out to get photographs and evidence. So I thought it was interesting, and I thought, these companies have so much data, so much medical data. Surely they should be able to just predict like who's recovered medically, and not force them back to work, but just work with them. Make it a constructive thing. And maybe we can even be proactive, and we can prevent people from committing fraud in the first place, because we can know before they recover that they're on that path and start having a constructive conversation. So the idea was to build like a modern day Minority Report. If you know that Tom Cruise film, they have this idea of pre-crime where you can prevent crime before it happens. So that was the first thesis. Can we find an insurance carrier, train a model, and can we identify, where people are recovering so that they don't have to go off and commit this fraud? We can talk to them and help them get back to a constructive workforce.
So a serendipity to some degree.
Absolutely.
The dinner. And how did you build your initial team? What kind of people you were looking for to make the core of the EvolutionIQ team at that point?
So initially, we needed a small team to build the front end UX. To get adoption of complex AI, you need to have a beautiful, interactive, visual tool that people can, work within. You can't give them just a spreadsheet of scores and say, go run with this. So I needed, React engineers to help me build that. I also needed help on the data side. So our initial team was purely data scientists. So I was looking for AI engineers that had specialty in either unstructured data, NLP, or tabular data, and specifically sequential data. And they self-selected. They also wanted to find a company that's dealing with this kind of data set. So initial team was mostly data scientists and some front-end engineers. I was our first data scientist. I wrote the first 6 months of data. I got the first model up, but that was years ago. And at this point, there are much smarter people than me continuing to evolve those systems.
Sure. So it took, you said, a year to get to your first customer who committed to provide the data so you can train the model and show the results on the real data sets. How about the funding part of that? During that year, and then after that first customer agreed, how do you approach funding the company?
So we went to Silicon Valley. We pitched something like 20 of the top VCs. About half of them gave us term sheets immediately. For them, it was a pretty easy investment to make. Hot AI company with the ex-Google AI team, already have a customer, already have access to a very proprietary data set that's going to give them like a massive moat. So the fundraising was actually the easiest part, the only easy part of starting the company. Everything else was much harder than that.
That was an easy part because you already had that customer.
Yes,
You went to them only after you had it. So the first year you bootstrapped.
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. You made it easy for them to say
Yeah.
yes. I think that's why it wasn't the easiest part. Okay, sounds good. In terms of the current team at Evolution, how do you think about what kind of people you bring in, what kind of culture you want to build, and overall, what kind of lessons maybe from Google did you take to building your company, if you took any?
So we took a lot. I say Evolution IQ is like a mini Google. We took all the best practices and best lessons learned from how Google builds infrastructure and technology, and we brought those with us. There are some things we didn't like, so we changed those, but a lot of practices carry over. So, our internal kind of methodology is to move fast, but do it in a high quality way. So we're not a company of hackers that break stuff. We want to build scalable, professional software. We do move fast, but there are limits to it. We're very heavy on collaboration documentation. So before code is written, our engineers first write a technical design doc, and they share it. And anybody has the opportunity to provide feedback. They don't have to, but everybody gets a look at it and can say, hey, I can think of a better way to do this, or have you thought about this? Or there's already a solution in our code base, or this open source software that does something similar. So those came directly from Google. We code review, all of our code before it goes in. We pair new engineers with mentors, with senior engineers for the first month to work closely together. As far as what kind of engineers do we look for? We look for people that have a track record of getting stuff across the finish line. That have a track record of launching things. I'm less interested in what they've launched and more in just seeing a pattern where they're constantly able to get stuff, into the market in front of a customer. Some engineers have a tendency to want to be stuck in like academia research land. So they build stuff, but nobody uses it. So when I interview people, I ask them, did you get this across the finish line? How did you do it? How did you get it in front of your customers? How did you get them to adopt it? How did you grow to 100,000 years and beyond? And when you speak with the right people, they have incredible stories to tell you, because it's hard. Building something is hard, but then getting adoption is much harder. And they each have their methodology and methods that they've used to achieve that. So that's definitely one of the most important things I personally look for. We of course do a technical assessment to make sure that they have the technical skills needed to be able to get the job done. But we're not super particular. If somebody is a good engineer that can solve problems, think on their feet, we believe that they can succeed in any language and any domain, given a little bit of time to learn.
In terms of seniority, do you have any preferences of hiring more junior people, hiring more senior people at this point of the evolution of the company?
We started with very senior people, like staff level engineers. And every year we're able to start hiring slightly less senior. Our goal eventually, for next year is we can hire, interns out of university and give them like meaningful work and a path, to develop their skills and develop their career with us. Right now we're hiring, like L4, L5 level engineers as the most junior, and we're of course still hiring senior and staff level engineers.
In terms of culture, what things did you take anything from Google, or how did you modify the way you saw culture or you developed culture at Google for your own teams, and how you approach this at Evolution IQ?
Yeah, um, I'll pick out a couple of things. So we're very metrics driven. We believe if it can't be measured, it didn't happen. Google is very much like this. They want people to be able to prove quantitatively the impact they've had. We brought that with us. We're very mission driven. So we want people to be always working on solutions that have a direct line of sight to a real world impact. And that's a bit different from Google. Google is, I think, willing to work on kind of purely theoretical areas and eventually find a fit. We want to find a fit first, which has worked great for us. So we are doing a lot of interesting research, but we try to always tie it to what we believe will be a real impact. We have an internal motto called GSD, get shit done. So we want people to always stop and ask themselves, am I doing the most important thing right now to get shit done? Or am I getting stalled on something? So we want people to always be productive and maintain a high velocity. We have an internal company, guideline, which is that we don't talk about politics at work. We respect each other's opinion, but it's just not a discussion that we'll ever have in a local Slack. We use that for discussing important things that matter for the company, for our mission, for getting injured people, disabled people back to work. Those are all great discussions. Outside of that, take it outside of work.
And in terms of this and the other parts of your culture, how do you make sure that people self-filter the candidates who are interested in joining the company, that they kind of select not to join you if they don't fully subscribe to all parts of the values that you have?
We have a pretty in-depth interview process. Each candidate meets with about 4 of our senior members of the team they'll be working with. And through that, we encourage them, to have a discussion and talk about not just purely technical things. And I guess through osmosis, it's working. We end up with both sides kind of self-selecting when there's a good fit versus when there isn't.
Let's talk about you personally. You're a certified flight instructor, and I was curious, what's the story behind this?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Eastern European country under communism. Aviation was very much allowed only for military, for like purposes of war. But I always loved the idea of flying, and it wasn't possible. So eventually we escaped communism, ended up in Austria, ended up as refugees in Canada, got a citizenship, moved to the US, got a citizenship. Eventually I was in a place in my life where I was actually able to buy an airplane and start flying it. And nobody was telling me what to do. It's amazing that in America you can do this. You can get into an airplane and start flying around. So when I was about 30, I got my license done, and I went from private pilot to commercial to instructor to seaplane to instrument. I went through all the ratings in the first 2 years, and to this day, I just absolutely love aviation. I think it's one of the most amazing things that a human being can do. On par with like being able to program computers to make intelligent decisions for themselves and create virtual realities.
I wonder if being a pilot, does it have any skill transfer to writing code or to running a company?
There is a talk that I give to our engineering team called How to Write Code That Doesn't Suck. And it's kind of the best paradigms of how to write modern code that is scalable and testable. And I encourage people to do things like always be refactoring. Before you write new code, refactor the old code. Instead of like creating some super function, that is 10 pages long and then breaking it up, just write like small module function in the first place. And the story that I give is when I was doing my private pilot license, you're allowed to land anywhere on the runway. There's a center line, but you can land on the left side or the right side. As a commercial pilot, you have to land on the center line. It's a requirement. As a private pilot, I was landing on the left and right of it. And my instructor said, Thomas, stop doing that, land on the center line. I said, Howard, no, I don't need to as a private pilot. He said, look, if you make that your habit, if you start doing it and you're diligent, it'll become a habit. It'll become automatic. And sure enough, after deliberately really focusing on landing on the center line, it became automatic for me. And as a private pilot, I had these beautiful commercial landings. And I tell people that in the same way, if you're deliberate and you practice, these things for a while, they become automatic, and you start to write like excellent code without any extra effort at all. So certainly lessons like that, have transferred over.
Focus on doing things properly from the beginning, and then it will become a second nature, and it will help you in the end.
It becomes second nature, exactly.
I wonder, in terms of other things, now if we address not the software engineers, but the founders of AI companies, what would be your advice to them now, looking back at your journey through starting an AI company and growing it to this stage? What would you want them to understand and appreciate about starting a business applying AI?
Yeah, so I wrote a couple notes down here. You brought this question up earlier. I think a lot of companies, there's a statistic, something like 87% of machine learning projects fail to ever launch. A lot of reasons for it, but I want to talk about a methodology of what we do to get to almost 100% success. The first thing we do is we spend a lot of time manually reviewing data. Just spend hours and hours reading your customer data sets and get a real sense of what's in there. It's a little bit painful. Most engineers want to straight jump into training a model and then go read the data. I think that's wrong. I think you should spend most of your time in the first week or 2 weeks just reading and reading and reading and taking notes and becoming an expert, asking a lot of questions. When you're, then you can do an analysis. So you should like be going very deep and doing a lot of distribution exploration, looking for outliers, selecting those outliers and reading through the details of, what is the cause of this. So become a complete expert until the point where it's just boring. Like there's nothing left for you to do. You know the distributions and the data so well. At that point, you can train your first model. The temptation is to use like BERT or some like, complex TensorFlow probability neural net. I think that's wrong. You should start with the simplest model possible with the least features possible, right? Start with like the smallest feature data set and start adding to it rather than starting with everything and removing, make it easy on yourself. So that's kind of the approach on the technical side. On the business side, it's very important to focus on a problem that has two properties. One is that it's very high ROI. So customer spends $1 on your platform and they get $5, $10 back. For us, it's a 10-to-1 ROI. If you're very selective, you'll find these problems. If you're not, you might end up with working on something that doesn't have an ROI that's measurable. The second property is the ROI should be directly measurable in the first year. It's going to be much easier for you to get your first customer if you can show them in the first year that you've already returned 10 times their money. You're going to get like fantastic case studies out of it. They're going to renew. It's just going to make your life much simpler. It may seem obvious me saying this, but when you're on the beginning of this journey, you have this like infinite search space of opportunities for AI, and they all seem very attractive. So it's very important to kind of pass through this great filter that I just described and be very diligent and say no to most of the things they're asking for and find the one that has that ROI. And try to capture the ROI in your platform directly, which is something we do. We're actually measuring every time impact happens, we can see it and we report back to them. So end of the year and every quarter, we're showing them exactly how much impact we've had on their business. We love like getting people back to work, and like reducing absence days. But at some point, the carrier is a business that cares about profitability. So we need to translate that into dollars saved. And that's been working really great for us. The other advice I have is, again, it's another great filter. Try to not build for a customer that will compete with you. I think the tendency is for developers to build for developers because we know ourselves so well. It's easier. But the reality is developers don't really want to pay for other people's software. They think they can build it themselves. So when you approach them with your solution, their first thought is, why don't we just build this ourselves? And they might try, which is going to make it harder for you to pay for it. They also don't have the same ability to produce a large budget and pay for the software. So try to build for the customer that is the least like you, not the most like you. Again, it's like probably seems obvious in retrospect, but when you're at the beginning of the journey, you tend to do the things that you're the most comfortable with. So get as far out of your comfort zone as you possibly can. For us, it was a pretty big departure, a bunch of Google AI engineers to be approaching bodily injury claims. It's great now, but in the beginning days, it was not the most obvious choice. Next point is on adoption. Adoption of AI, I think, is actually much harder for technical teams to solve than to build the technology. We're all great engineers. We know how to build technology. Can you get somebody to use it? Not easy to do. You should be spending something like 70% of your time figuring out how to get people to use it. So what we've done that's worked really well, if we invested heavily in a beautiful UX, invested heavily in a system that explains itself, not a SHAP explainer, not some like random like features with positive, negative weights. We build a custom system that speaks the language of our end user. It's in English, and it tells them things that are meaningful for them that matter. So we're filtering a lot of this stuff out. Sometimes we'll train a special model just for the purpose of explaining what the model's doing to get them excited to use it. And there's a soft skill part, is we actually spend a lot of time with our customers, sharing the experience with them of looking at the first results, and explain to them why it's doing what it's doing, getting their feedback, their frustrations, making improvements, showing them the next week that, hey, we've improved this part that you were annoyed by, it's already better. So in the early stages, it's very important to spend time, with your end users one-on-one or in a small group and give them like a, real platform to speak to. I recommend an article I really like by Andre Karpathy. called A Recipe for Training Neural Networks. It's a fantastic, like, real world approach on how to build these models. And he covers a lot of the stuff that I was just talking about.
Sounds good. I will make sure we add this book to the show notes so people can check it out. And thanks a lot. That's a lot of great points for entrepreneurs to think through. I wonder, in terms of your journey, which one would you say was something that you said, okay, we didn't follow properly, and now we know it much better, so now we do it much better.
I think I can talk about one thing here. It's very important for a new company to be like super ultra focused, do one thing really well. And it's tempting to do many things because there are big opportunities. You want to open up new markets. Now, we've remained very diligent. We started in one industry, in disability, which is a smaller industry, and we're able to achieve this echo chamber effect where already everyone's talking about us, because there's a limited number of carriers. However, along our path, we have been tempted to go and try to start new projects in new industries. Now, fortunately, we didn't get very far with those. We learned pretty quickly that it's going to stress us too much in the organization. But I think this is an important lesson for founders, is to know your limits, know that you can't really do more than one or two things at once as a new company. It's not possible. I don't care how good you are. It's really, really hard to do this. So stay focused. At the same time, you have to be realistic. And if you haven't reached product market fit, don't become obsessive about making it work. Be open to doing some exploration, some exploitation. And once you find it, then you stay focused. So it's a balancing act. And in the real world, it's not always clear if you have product market fit. It's not always clear if you are ready to start, expanding to a new market because you have solidified the first one. But these are some of the most important decisions, that could make or break a company, especially with a complex AI product. When you're developing one versus two, it's a lot of stress. The founders are now not really working on two problems; they're working on one, which means the other one is going to be, shelved for a little while, which can hurt it.
It is a very important decision that will make or break the company, as you said. And founders are by nature optimistic people. Otherwise, they would have not founded the company to start with. And there's a tendency always to think, yeah, it's not a big deal. We'll handle it. We'll handle another product. We'll handle another type of market or another type of use case. I'm sure you can relate to that. So, how do you fight that? How do you make sure you fight that intrinsic optimism in you and counterbalance it to get to the right decision here?
Yeah, I think you can take almost like a military approach to it. You can set hard limits on the time and resources dedicated to achieve certain outcome. So you can say, we're going to take a shot at this opportunity, but we will at most invest 3 months. We will dedicate only these two people to work on it. Nobody else is allowed to work on this project. And we must achieve this agreed upon metric if it's going to move forward. And if it's not, the discussion is over and we're not going to continue it unless something very dramatic happens. And in that sense, you can prevent this from spinning out of control and spending like a year on some crazy rabbit hole that doesn't eventually lead anywhere. So I think those kind of constraints can be very helpful, and they can actually provide more focus for the team that is doing exploration and get to an outcome that everyone's happy with, whether or not it's successful.
And the same rule applies to the number of those shots that you're taking simultaneously. So you also limit yourself to say, I will take only 2 shots at a time or 1 shot.
When you have those constraints, like 2 people for 3 months, at some point you're out of people. So you actually can't do anymore, right? Because you can't take 2 people off.
Well, the problem is before you run out of people, you will dramatically hurt your main product because you're constantly sucking those people out of it.
But when you make it very clear that, those 2 people are going to be doing something completely different for 3 months, you start to get pretty clear feedback if it's going to stress the organization too much. If it's like a side project for them, it becomes very blurry, and it's hard to measure how much time do they spend on that versus the other one. So I think those constraints can be very helpful.
Turning to the future now, what do you see the adoption of AI-powered tools in insurance overall, and what are the next inflection points that will move the industry further along the adoption curve?
So I personally believe it's inevitable that the future of insurance, especially bodily injury, is going to be claims guidance. I do not see a world in the next couple of years where companies are still wanting to do this the old manual way. Based on the numbers we're seeing in ROI, it would just be crazy, And I think companies that are not able to innovate, they don't have that DNA, are just going to cease to exist. They won't be competitive. It's a commoditized industry. They're competing for the same market, for margin. If your competitor is able to do things 30% more efficiently, at some point you're just going to have to, fold your cards. So I think the future is absolutely guided. We, as a company, EvolutionIQ, we are on a path to definitely be the dominant company that transforms the industry. I think we'll end up taking down most of it. I do see space for some niche competitors to come in and maybe solve some specific small problems that we're not interested in. But right now we have the right team, the right velocity. We have a real moat with the data set, our common data format, our relationships, our experience that, we're moving very quickly to become the leader in the whole industry. Right now we're the leader in disability and quickly doing the same in workers' compensation.
And do you expect it to be a relatively brief transition?
Right. So there is a speed limit to how fast we can go. It takes a few months to transform a carrier from non-guided to claims guidance. We can only do so many at a given time. There are hundreds of companies in the US and more globally. So, there is a speed limit of how fast we can go, but we're moving quickly. In the order of years, I do believe it's going to happen, the whole industry. Like somewhere between 5 and 10, I see a world where every carrier is using this technology and it becomes as commonplace and as needed as a SQL database is today. You can't imagine being an insurance carrier without a SQL database. I think in the same sense in the future, you won't be operating without having an AI claims guidance system to help drive your workforce to be more efficient.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is so much data there that it's really hard to see how it can be handled
Yeah.
without either AI help or just ignored otherwise.
Yeah. And it's so expensive to build a system and maintain it. It makes sense for the industry to leverage a single vendor or multiple vendors to build this platform for them. For a single carrier to try to build this is nonsensical. We've spent over $30 million on our platform. It doesn't make sense for one company to want to do this. The transfer learning, again, a single company can't do this. A third party can. So we do have the ability to do transfer learning between different data sets. So I think for that reason, the future is going to be claims guidance, and it's going to be a platform that is shared by the whole industry.
How will they set up or how they will build their competitive edge if they use the same platform, each one of them?
So they already divide the world up geographically or by policy type. So a company might specialize in farming or in construction. So that's already the case today, right? Today they're all making manual decisions and they're very competitive. In the future, they'll be competitive the same way, but they'll have AI guidance to make, to get people back to work sooner, which makes them more profitable. Now, what this does pretty quickly is they start to reduce their rates so they can basically get more business, which makes insurance cheaper for everybody. So, the other thing I like to talk about is our eventual outcome is going to be that insurance becomes cheaper for everybody else. So if we can reduce the cost by, 10, 20, 30%, that money will go to families to send their kids to better school, to go on nicer vacations, to do the things that they love.
It all comes out of your paycheck in the end. That's for sure. So that makes perfect sense, and that's a wonderful thing to happen if we have this cost reduced by 20 or 30%. For the last question, let's talk about the evolution of AI in general. What excites and concerns you most there?
The rate of innovation right now is incredible. If you see what's happening with GPT-3, with DALL-E 2, I think in some ways we're exceeding Moore's law with this new way of deep learning. AlphaFold is another good example. So that's one big aspect, is this like these more and more generalizable language models, and we are now using a sentence encoder for our sequential language model. So we're starting to come up with a more and more way to generalize the structured data. The other thing that's exciting is how early we are in AI. If you think about how much data the world generates every day, how much is already stored, in cold storage, and how much is being utilized by true AI today, right? I don't have a measure on this, but I would be willing to bet that less than 1% of both the new data and the stored data is being used for AI today. Probably like 0.1%. I think in the future, it's going to be close to 100%. And so that means like the opportunity ahead of us is just massive. We are just at the very beginning of this transformation of our human species, of leveraging machines to help them make decisions. In 10 years, what's going to be very different. So for people thinking about getting into AI, think about that, right? We are using so little of the data today that eventually will be used. And someone's going to solve these problems. I think the sooner we do it, the better off we'll be. Like in our industry, we are showing crazy like ROI and returns in getting real people back to real jobs, getting them off the disabilities and getting them out of these, infinitely long injury states with like opioid abuse. This stuff is solvable. Technology is very helpful here. So I'm very optimistic about the future in general, the future of AI, and just how much exciting work is ahead for all of us still, all of us data scientists and entrepreneurs.
That's definitely true. It does feel like we have an inflection point here where the things getting faster and faster by day in AI, and we're seeing new, more and more impressive results applying AI as well. Where can listeners learn more about Evolution IQ? How they can follow you on social media? And I know you're hiring, so talk about that as well.
Yeah, so I'll talk about hiring first. We are growing like crazy. We are hiring all across engineering, product, sales, and customer success. On the engineering side, we're hiring machine learning engineers, anywhere from middle senior to staff level. We are hiring data platform engineers. We use Dagster, a very modern orchestration platform. We use BigQuery, Google Cloud, Python 3.8. On the application side, we are using React Web. So folks coming out of Meta have a good experience here. We're building a very modern UX workflow platform with many modules and very interesting complex UI problems there. We're hiring DevOps, to support our scaling needs. Next year, we're having just unprecedented growth going on. On the product side, we're hiring product managers, either that have experience working in AI products or are passionate about it. We are willing and very happy to train folks. We have some real product AI experts here that have been doing this for a long time, even before EIQ. On sales, we're hiring sales experts that work within the workers' comp industry. And then as far as how to follow me, I have a pretty active LinkedIn account. I just wrote an article recently about this concept of companies that started in 2019 and are thriving today, have survived through two great filters, two great tech layoff events. These companies are very special and you should pay attention to them. It's a rare time in tech where you can have this filter and see like who got spit out the other end and is doing well. So we're one of those companies. We're very fortunate. And I write about what I believe is was our secret sauce. Why have we done so well in a very difficult world? And then I also have a Twitter account that's pretty active. My Twitter handle is my first initial last name, which is T Vykruta. It's Tango Victor Yankee Kilo Romeo Uniform Tango Alpha.
Sounds good. We'll link all those to the show notes as well. Tom, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for helping the injured people change their lives for the better.
Thank you, Artem. Likewise. This was a lot of fun.